All right, we're working on chapter 2. We have an option. You can either get the book itself, which is my personal preference for me, but if you don't have the funds, it's not something you can afford right now, you couldn't find it any cheaper, there is the PDF on the website. The book is available for you. It's just a matter of whether or not you want to get it through actual, Chegg, or if you choose to, get it through a download on the PDF, which is on our Canvas. So keep in mind, sorry, I got cat hair on my face. Keep in mind if for some reason you do download the PDF, it's big, so be ready for that. If you download it, just download it once. Try not to download it more than once, or you can actually open it within Canvas. So just be mindful of that. It's available for you. We work out of the book. I recognize it's older. You know what? It's okay. It's still doing exactly what we need. It's covering the topics we need to cover. And so I might call the book out on a few things. Not necessarily critical thinking wise. That actually, it's amazing. It's perfect. That's why I keep using it. But some of the stuff is a little dated. Like it's got LeBron James and just stuff where you're like, oh my God, that's like a decade and a half ago. We get it. We're just going to kind of like breeze past that and recognize everything else in this book is exactly what we want. Okay, chapter 2. One thing to recognize, I'm going to really like hone in, at least, in the book, how we're using the vocabulary words. And the reason for that is these words are a part of critical thinking. Again, don't try and Google the answer. It's pretty much always wrong. Use the book and then apply this to what we're going to be doing. In fact, we're going to be watching a movie. We watched 4 movies, but in coming up, the movie that we will watch is going to be called Thank You for Smoking. And you're going to notice in the study guide, there's going to be questions, and the questions wrap all the way around the vocabulary words. And what I'm looking for is for your ability to use those vocabulary words correctly as we use them in class and in critical thinking. So again, if you're Googling your answers or you're using AI, it's going to bite you in the butt. It happens every time. So use your own brain. You have the absolute capabilities. If you're not sure, you can check with me. You can check with the book. I'm here for you. Okay? All right. So let's get into chapter 2 as fast as I possibly can. All right. I'm just going to try and hit all the vocabulary words to kind of help you understand where we're going, especially because we have a lot. So let's do it. Assumptions. You probably already heard this before. Assumptions make an ass out of you and me. To assume something, right? All right, whatever. Anyway, so assumptions are something that we believe to be true, which is usually taken for granted rather than being questioned, right? Assumption is something that we just take for granted. We just assume. We make an assumption. Like you can make an assumption about someone says they're a Boy Scout or a Girl Scout. You make this assumption about who they are based on either the affiliation or what it is that you know based on your experiences. Maybe those experiences aren't actual experiences. Maybe there's something that you were told at some point in your life. And we will talk about that a little bit later. How sometimes assumptions are incorrect based on information that we thought we knew, but we didn't, right? We just believe them to be true based on who knows what happened. We'll talk about values in a little bit. All right. So speaking of which, values, if you didn't notice, I don't know if you can see this little ton of thing right here. The vocabulary words are always on the edge here, just as a little cheat sheet for you. So if you need to find them, there they are. All right. Values are beliefs, ideals, or principles that are considered worthy and held in high regard. Okay. Think about your values. What do you value in life? Okay. If you look on page 39, that's actually going to give you kind of like a good honing in of understanding maybe what you value in life. And you can, normally I do this in class, but you can do it for your own well-being. Page 39, you're going to see a whole bunch of values. Pick your top 3. Actually, pick your top 5. Pick your top 5 values. Go through, kind of prioritize them to your top 3. If you have to get rid of 2, what 2 would you get rid of? What are your top 3? And then go back down to what's your first number 1 value. And then put those in order. And why do I have you do that? So that you can recognize what's important to you in your life. And these values are why we do what we do in life. You value something. And sometimes when we talk about value prioritization, we have to go, which value am I going to hold to myself, right? We'll talk about that in a second. So when we talk about values, we also talk about value assumptions. And these are assumptions, remember, things that we believe to be true. Assumptions about what we individually believe and value. So a value assumption again, is an assumption about how we individually believe, or how we individually believe and value something. Okay? All right, so those are our assumptions. Now, reality assumptions, there's a difference. So we have the value assumptions. We have this value. We have an assumption of how, if given the chance, how would we apply these values to our lives? How are you going to apply these values to your lives? You tell me, right? So that's the actual value assumption versus the reality assumption, in which you actually take those values and how do you apply them to your life? Or do you? What do we act on? We say we're this, but what we really do is that. That's the difference, okay? Reality assumption is a belief about how the world actually is. We're going to talk about that in chapter 3, okay? All right, let's go now to value assumptions, value conflicts. Oh, that's my favorites. Let's go down there. Actually, let's go back into understanding where our values are coming from, or where we're getting our assumptions, right? So when we talk about assumptions, it's a belief that we have. Where did we come up with this belief? We were influenced by something. What influenced us? We've got parents, siblings, teachers, television, classrooms, school, movies, internet, friends, right? All of these different things are what kind of push us into our assumptions of how we think someone, something, or someplace is. Totally assumptions. They're influenced by all these things around us, all right? Next, we have to ask ourselves, let's get there. Where do we get our values? Now, notice the list is very similar. We got parents, siblings, teachers, classroom, school, TVs, movies, internet, friends, and we're talking about values. So we're going to throw in church. We're going to throw in books. Depends on the types of books you're reading, right? All right. If you read books, I don't know, maybe you read magazines. I have no idea. But those are influences on, let's see here, influences on how you value something, okay? Values are usually influenced by outside things, and then how you have a moral compass inside and whether or not you feel this is right or wrong, blah, blah. We'll get into morals in a second. All right, so a value assumption is beliefs about what is good and important that forms the base of our opinions on issues. All right, let's ruin issues again, right? An issue is something that you have based on a topic, right? The issue on, again, whether or not you feed your dog Alpo, right? Do I feed my dog Alpo? The topic is Alpo. The issue is, do I feed it to my dog? Now I have to ask myself, what are my values? So that's going to lean into how I make this decision. I value my dog's health. Well, I'm looking on the back of the can of the Alpo and I'm like, oh, the advertising's lying to me. It's not as healthy as I thought, right? And you look at all that and you go, I value my dog's health, but you also value money. You're like me, you're like, oh, I can only afford so much. I love my dog, but I also have to eat myself, right? So now that's that value prioritization, which is more important for us, okay? Let's see here. This is how we end up having arguments, right? When we have someone might say, oh, I totally feed my dog Alpo, been doing it for 20 years, look at him, he's doing great. And then other people are like, no, not for me, I just don't like the ingredients in it. And this is how you create arguments. Again, not fighting, but arguments where you talk about an issue and someone gives their reasoning, which is based on data and science. So someone would say, well, from my experience in my research and giving it to my dog for 20 years, it's been great, no problems. And then the other person goes, well, based on my research and data, I'm seeing that it is not healthy for animals. So I choose, if I had a choice on this issue of whether or not I give my dog Alpo, I'm going to say no. Okay? That's okay. They came to the conclusion based on reasoning, right? Reasoning, which is data and research, on a topic, okay, or on an issue of a topic. Right. I know I'm going to kind of repeat that a lot, and hopefully it's like banging into your brain so you understand what I'm looking for. The reasons are that data, all right, that research, that thing that says to you, oh, this is the reason why I've come to this conclusion, right? Please don't say in conclusion. I will absolutely lose my mind. I hate in conclusion. I'll give you full-on 0 because it just angers me because I've said it so times. Don't do in conclusion. You can say, I've come to the conclusion that I will give my dog Alpo because I found that blah, 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 right? These are the reasons why. And the reason is because data shows it was good for my dog. That's what we do. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to try and zoom through these as best I can. All right, so just make sure that when we're talking about value assumptions, you're understanding both what a value is and an assumption, and both of which are influenced by outside. But as critical thinkers, it's okay that we can get more information from other things, and that can change either those assumptions or those values, right? Sometimes life events happen and shake us to our core, and we're like, I don't value what I thought I valued before, okay? Just keep that in mind. All right, value conflict are, again, conflicts that we have between values, right? So conflicts and disagreements about the priority different values have given the opportunity to have to make a decision. Again, what do you value? Do you value being able to eat yourself, your dog's life, right? And I can't make that judgment. I can only say, here's some options, and then you get to make that, right? It's up to you, based on your values, what's important to you, on what decision that you make, right? And again, sometimes that changes. And sometimes you're just like, man, it sounds kind of shitty that I'm going for this, it's cheaper versus, my dog's health, but that's just the decision I have to make. And that's life, man. That's just what we got to do sometimes, okay? So sometimes unresolved arguments are often due to contested values, especially when there's cherished values. When you're having, again, a discussion on a topic, right, on an issue, which is an argument, with somebody else, sometimes what happens is those cherished values are what could potentially get in the way and create unresolved conflicts. So, what are some examples of unresolved conflicts? In our culture, right? Some unresolved arguments in our culture. Think of some, right? What are some unresolved arguments? And, you can name like 10 right now, especially what we have going on about what's valuable, right? We might say maybe abortion's the topic, right? And some people value, the child's life, and then you have to say, well, when does that start? And we're going through a lot of stuff like what is the value for you and how does it matter, right? We're going to talk about principles, tests, and rules and all that stuff in just a second on how it's important when we're making these decisions, because what are the consequences and vice versa when we put certain values above other values, right? So we just have to be mindful of that. And sometimes it's like, hey, it's my value, it's my life, I'm going to do whatever I want. I'm like, I get you, I get it, right? It's like, it's my moral compass that I need to follow, so that's what I'm going to follow. Absolutely. All right. And then think about who you have a value conflict with. Politics, let's be honest, everyone's got a value conflict at this point. So that's like number one, right? But there could be other things. Maybe, again, the value conflict could be whether or not you're feeding your dog Alpo. Someone could look at you and be like, that's not my value. I value my dog's life over even my own health, right? Like, I'm just going to eat what I need to eat so that way my dog, who's an angel on this earth, I do believe dogs are angels, even though I'm a cat person, I love dogs, right? But you have that value. Like, I value my dog's life more than my own, so I'm going to feed him that. And someone's like, man, my dog's going to eat. He's going to be fine. I'm going with the Alpo, right? So you might be in conflict with one another because of that, okay? That's just kind of how it is. And then think about yourself. How might you have a value conflict with yourself? How might you have a value conflict with yourself? Again, it could be the two. I love my dog, but I love me too. What do I do? I don't know. That's up to you. All right. Value prioritization. I've kind of already said it. I'm going to bring it back around. The process of choosing which value is most important in an issue. Which is more important, my dog's life or me eating? I don't know, right? And that might change. It might initially be like, oh, absolutely my dog. He's an angel. And then after a while, you're like, dude, if I have one more box of mac and cheese, I'm going to lose my shit. So, puppy dogs, I love you, but I got to eat some veggies, right? You might just have to, I don't know. I have no idea what that might look like. So we could talk about, again, the process of choosing which value is most important to you. That can also change. That's all right. And again, as we move forward, it's okay as these things move, as you experience more life, as you learn more things. It's okay to change your mind, right? And it can come back and forth. It's all based on experience. So like maybe for me, a value would be climate change. Like, oh man, let's do everything we can to make sure that we leave a better world for our children. I don't have kids, but I teach a lot of people, and I'd like to think their kids would have a very beautiful life, right? So for me, it's climate change, absolutely. What do I do? All right, but the same thing, I'm like, I gotta get to work, so I gotta drive a car, because I have multiple jobs. I gotta bounce back and forth. I can't really rely on public transportation right now. I just gotta do what I gotta do. So now I'm kind of like, all right, so I'm driving my own car, right? And then shoot, I also teach online. God, I got to get a new computer or a new, phone or something. And I'm like, oh, I'm contributing to e-waste. It's like, okay. And I have to start doing these things where I'm like, survival and teaching and saving the earth. Like it's tough, right? That kind of thing, right? So, and then we can also think about ways in which maybe the government is prioritizing, state funds or national budget when it comes to this, right? What's the priority? What's the value? Are you going by what your constituents need? What they need, what they want versus what they need. And that could be that difference, okay? Alrighty. I hope this is helping you in some way. Let's talk about morals. All right, morals, principles that distinguish right from wrong behavior. The caveat here is what's right and what's wrong. And I'm very philosophical. So if we sat down and had a conversation about right and wrong, it gets very gray and very misty, man. It's like, I don't know. Right and wrong, man. That depends on, again, what you value, what you have a priority within those values of what you might consider right and what you might consider wrong, okay? And behaviors. The question would be, morals should be more about your moral, your actions. So people with integrity act according to their morals, right? So integrity is, what do you do when nobody's looking, right? That's the important thing to recognize when we think of integrity. Like, what are the things you do behind the curtains when nobody's watching you? That's real integrity, okay? All right, and that would be acting on your morals. And what do your morals look like, all right? What is something that is considered immoral? I've had conversations with students for an entire class about whether or not murder's moral, because it all depends, right? It's all situational. Someone's coming at you, you're defending yourself, you kill somebody in your own defense. That moral, is that immoral? Right? This could go on for hours, right? It's all about perspective, values, experience, and so forth. Okay. Do people argue about what is moral and immoral? Absolutely. We do this every day, all day. Whole world's doing that right now. And what are some examples of that? Why, right? What's moral, what's not moral? Like if we were to say, there are people in Gaza who are waiting in line for, food because there's, a war's going on, and, Israeli people come in and they're bombing them. And then people are going to ask, okay, what's the moral thing that these people are trying to eat? And then somebody comes in and bombs them, or is it, oh, this is, revenge for whatever, right? There's just so much. And one person's morals is a little bit different than someone else's morals, and it's all based on, what you value. Okay, so it all kind of comes back and forth. Just keep that in mind. The world is gray. Unfortunately, there's no real black and white. Laws and rules and, things try and make black and white cases of things that just aren't black and white. So anyway, that brings us to ethics. Ethics are morals that are encoded or codified into a system, right? So when the morals are codified into something like, you might know ethics like HIPAA when it comes to the medical field. You don't divulge certain information. Another example would be, you can use these on how we hold conduct, how do I say this? It's these standards of conduct in which we hold people to, meaning, again, certain doctors, you don't take advantage of patients, or you don't divulge certain information, or, and schools, certain things that are, appropriate or inappropriate. We would call those ethics. What's ethical? Like, what's the right thing to do? Like, I pass one student just because I like them, and I don't pass another because I don't like them. Like, that is obviously unethical, right? It's a moral standards that are codified into a system. Okay, maybe different laws. Can laws be unethical? Yeah, absolutely. That's the problem. Is some laws, unfortunately, are unethical. Like when we talk about jaywalking. Jaywalking was actually unethical because it was being used to arrest certain people, usually minorities or whatever, just kind of like excuses to do that. So anyway, blah, blah, it's a whole other thing. I won't get into the details. But again, we can think about slavery and things like that. Like, yeah, laws. Okay, my favorite most, I would say, and potentially unethical law would be, say you are, you're homeless, you're on the street, you don't have anywhere to go, and somebody fines you for being homeless. That doesn't seem ethical, right? Like, don't you have, you're homeless, you probably don't have the money to pay the bill. The irony, right, of how, that works. Okay, anyway, but that to me would be an unethical based on my, I don't know, my moral beliefs. So correct me if I'm wrong. You're absolutely able to call me out on those. We can take a look, just look in your book about libertarianism, utilitarianism and egalitarianism, that kind of stuff. I don't go into details, it's just there, so you can take a look. Two things to take a look at would be religious values, which are based on faith and spiritual faith, right? Whatever your religious values are, you don't necessarily have to be in a religion to have religious values. Okay, so again, what influences that? It's your church, it's your spiritual gurus, it's, I don't know, your therapist, I don't know, what's your thing? Prima facie values. I'm going to emphasize this because it's going to be, and thank you for Smoking's study guide. There's a few of those, okay? Prima facie values are values that, or ethical values that are considered to be self-evident and obvious and to rational human beings, right? Like murder. Like we would say a prima facie value is that we value the life of other people. That would be a universal ethical value, right? We value the life of other people. You'd think that would be more universal, but whatever. We're gonna just use that as an example. All right. So prima facie values. Let's go really quick to the study guide. When we go into which character of the movie, you're gonna watch it, you're gonna know which character represents prima facie values and what are they? What are the values that everyone else would conclude to say yes, that is an ethical value, that's a good value, and who embodies it and who continues with it. So when you watch the movie, you'll see. Let's get back to chapter 2 again. Universal ethical values considered to be self-evident, okay, and obvious to a rational individual in like every culture. All right, so just kind of think about that. Yeah, I say this, I have to kind of like push this really hard because I feel sometimes often students don't understand what prima facie values are, and then they Google it and it's totally wrong. So if you try and Google prima facie values, it is going to be incorrect. So an example would be honesty, right? So a system of universal ethical principles such as honesty, respect for others, respect for human life, but are considered to be self-evident, like it's obvious. Like obviously honesty is a prima facie value because it's a good value to have. Like everyone can pretty much say honesty is a good value. And then it's obvious to just rational people, like a rational person will be like, yeah, okay. All right, I'm gonna try and get through this a little bit forward. Okay, all right. Ideal value is a value that is considered to be right and good. What's your ideal value? You tell me, what's an ideal value, right? So the ideal value is the value in which you would say, this is a value I want to strive for. I want to be that. I want to be honesty. Honesty is a value of mine, so I learned to strive to be that. Well, the real value is putting that value to the test. Are you honest all the time? Are there times in which you feel you can't be honest, right? What's that? So a real value, again, vocabulary, is a value considered to be right and good that is acted upon in one's life. So one is that one you consider to be right and good. The real value is the value in which you take part in, you actually take action on, okay? All right, I want you to make sure that you know exactly what I mean when I say that. Okay, principles test. All right, we have 4 of them. We have the role exchange test. We have the universal consequences test. We have the new case test and the higher principles test, okay? Role exchange test. Put yourself in someone else's shoes. If the action that I am taking has consequences, would I be okay on the other end if those consequences, how would I feel if those consequences hit me, right? So, you have to empathize with people who will be affected by your action, all right? So the role exchange test, role exchange, we're exchanging roles, test is whether or not, if you put yourself in the shoes of the person who's feeling the consequences of your action, would you be okay with that? You tell me. That's actually, the role exchange test is in the study guide, and we're asking Nick, he's the main character, apply the role exchange test to Nick's confrontation with the journalist, Heather Holloway, and ask yourself whether it would be right for the other person to take the action if you're going to be the person experiencing the consequences. So what Nick does, right, so if we were to pull it, like what Heather Holloway does, if she were to be in Nick's, let's see, so Nick's confrontation with the journalist, you could put yourself in either shoe, right? What Heather did, how would Heather feel if if it happened to her, or vice versa? What Nick does, you tell me. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Don't think too hard about it. Just look at that role exchange test. Look at what happens between the two of them and ask who would feel what based on the consequences of their actions. All right? I'm trying not to give away too many answers. It is a critical thinking class, so I gotta force you into that, but you're gonna feel it, you're gonna know, and you'll be like, oh, put yourself in someone else's shoes. What's it feel like? Universal consequences test. Here we go. The test focuses on the consequences of an action that you might take and what would happen if everyone in a similar situation took your action. All right, so when we say universal, it's like you're going to take an action. Now, what if everyone else did the same exact thing in the same exact situation, right? Would the results be acceptable? Okay. So the book uses an example of recycling. We can all fight about whether or not recycling is even worth it, but the question here is, say it is, right? Say recycling is worth it, and you're throwing all your, recycling into the garbage because like I don't even care, I don't want to do it. But then say everyone else did. Well, shit, now we got a problem, right? So you have to ask, what are the consequences of your actions if everyone else did it too? I think of it like you're driving and you throw your trash out the window. I don't know who does that, I'm not judging, but I'm judging a little bit. You're like, oh, it's just a cup. Well, if everyone's throwing the damn cups out, well, then we have a bunch of trash along, the highway or freeway or whatever. So when we put a universal consequences test, what happens if everyone else does it? Should you do that action? So if your action is rejectable, like if you would reject it if everyone else did it, then you shouldn't do it, right? If your action is acceptable if everyone else did it, then you should do it, right? Consequences test, right? Universal consequences test, all right? We got it? Good. All right. New case test. All right. This one's a little bit more complicated. I don't really push too hard for it, but I'm going to kind of go over it anyway. Consider whether your action is consistent with other actions in that same category. All right. You choose the hardest case and see if you would act in the same way in that case you plan to act in this one, right? So you have this one situation, but you try and make the hardest of the similar situations and go, would I act the same in both or would it change? That's the question. So the question is, would you act the same? If you would act the same, then your decision is consistent with your principles. But if it's not, that's not going with your principles, right? So an example would be, you are against this research where there's some animal cruelty because we're trying to get some answers, and they use animals, right? And you're like, oh, I don't like that. I value these animals. That's really important to me. Well, the research they're doing is life-saving. Like it's saving humans. And then you go, shoot. While I value the life of these animals, I also value, say, the same, they're getting a cure for my child. I'd kind of be okay if they found the cure using animals in order to get the cure for my child, right? So that's kind of where you have to ask yourself, would you still accept it in a harder case? That's the question. The other example is turning a photo over to police in a murder case, right? You got the photo and you're like, well, it's freedom of press. I don't have to give it up. Like, I can do whatever I want. But then if you imagine, what if it was one of my family members? I'd want to know. Like, I'd want to catch the killer. So I'd give up the photos. Okay? Value prioritization. There you go. Lastly, we have the higher principle test. Actually, there's a question, I think, in the study guide for that. Does Nick pass or fail the higher principles test? And explain your reasoning. And your reasoning is the facts behind it. So let's get back to that. Higher principle test is if the principle on which you are basing your action is consistent with the higher, more general principle that you accept. Okay, so think about a general principle or a value that you accept. Think of something, I'm trying to think like honesty. All right, if the principle on which you are basing your action on is consistent with that, right, then that's the higher principle test. Okay, so an example is roommates not doing dishes. Let's be honest, how often do we have roommates and you walk in the damn kitchen and they haven't done dishes in a week? You're like, And then your instinct is like, you know what, then I'm not going to do mine. You're not going to do yours, I'm not going to do mine, right? You got a little vengeful streak going on. But then you think of the higher principles test, like in the end, like what would you really do? And you're like, well, I live with integrity. So because I live with integrity, because it's a huge value of mine, I'm going to do my dishes. Whether or not this other person does their dishes is really not my business. I mean, it is because you're living in together. So what you do is you do your dishes. And then you sit down with your roommate in a non-passive aggressive way and say, bah, do your fucking dishes, man. It's getting gross. Yes, I cuss, get over it, it's all right, right? Anyway, so that would be the higher principles test. I maybe take the high road might be a good way of remembering that. So I guess the question you can ask, does Nick pass or fail the higher principles test, right? What was his principle? And what's the higher principle? What does he value? And does he stick with that value, right? Given the situation. You tell me when you watch the movie. All right. Real quick, I want to make sure that you understand what rationalizations are. Please go to page 51 to 52. They overlap with fallacies. You'll see that. Can you go there and really look at what a rationalization is? So when I'm asking for examples of rationalization, you actually use those. Please use those. I'm going to say it again. Page 51 to 52 is rationalizations. Ta-da! I'll give you the answer. Okay. Rationalizations when we don't act ethically. When we do something that's not so right, we often come up with rationalizations to excuse our behavior, right? How many of you have done this? We've all done this. We're human. This is what happens. It's a defense mechanism, right? It's our way that it's our way of justifying when we've done something bad. Well, I'll give you some examples, but you'll see that a lot in Thank You for Smoking. So that's what I'm kind of coming up to. In the study guide, one of the questions is literally asking, and I'm going to verify, let you know what I'm talking about here. The mod squad is the people who are sitting at the table, right? The people who are sitting at the table who specialize in rationalizations. That's what they do. They rationalize their terrible behavior. But what are their rationalizations? Of that list, pick them out. Tell me what they do, okay? So the mod squad specializes in rationalizations of the groups that they represent. We're talking about guns, we're talking about alcohol, we're talking about cigarettes. Like, what are the rationalizations that they use to, that they represent within their group? You'll see. So just list a few. And let me give you an example of a few. Again, 51 to 52. In fact, I think one of them actually says exactly what these one of these actual rationalizations. So, if it's necessary, it's ethical. All right, that's a rationalization. Well, if it's necessary, it's ethical. We could say that about stealing, right? It's necessary, stealing bread to feed the family, right? That's the moral dilemma. That's the question. Rationalization, if it's illegal and permissible, it's proper, right? So they could have said that about slavery, right? Well, it's legal and permissible, but it's not necessarily right or proper, okay? I was just doing it for you, right? How many of you rationalize that? I was just fighting fire with fire. It'd be like, they didn't do their dishes, I'm not going to do my dishes, right? That's a rationalization, okay? I'm just fighting fire with fire. It doesn't hurt anyone, right? Like, again, what's integrity? Doing something when nobody's looking, right? It doesn't hurt anybody. No one knew that I didn't do it, or nobody knew that I did it, okay? It can't be wrong. Everyone's doing it. All right, that's one. It depends on your friends, right? It's okay if I don't gain personally. I'm going to do this thing. I'm not gaining personally. Right? That's a rationalization. And I've got it coming. I've done all these things. I'm owed this thing. So I'm just going to preemptively do it for myself. That's rationalization. Or I'm going to do this thing, but I can still be objective, right? I'm going to give my cousin this job, but I'm going to totally be objective, and I'm not going to give him favoritism. Of course you are. That's why you're going out of your way to get him the job, right? So that is what I'm talking about when we talk about rationalizations, okay? All right. Claim, reason, warrants. These are very important because, again, we are going to be using this in Thank You for Smoking study guide. Words, I'm losing it. I'm almost done. I promise I'm almost done. Okay, so the reason why I say this is we're talking about what are the reasons Nick is sent with a briefcase full of money to the Marlboro Man. Remember, what are the reasons, the details, the thing behind it, all right? What's the purpose of that? And then when we talk about explain why Heather Holloway ends up covering weather on TV using the term warrant. What was the warrant? I'm going to explain that in a second. And then I thought there was another one in here. Oh yeah, the claim. All right, what claim does Nick make about his son, about winning arguments? Okay, let's remember that one. So look at the questions before you watch the movie. It makes it much easier. All right, a claim. All right, a claim is a statement of an individual's beliefs or stand upon an issue. All right. I'm making this claim, these are my beliefs on this issue, okay? These are my beliefs on this issue. That's a claim. Hopefully that helps you. Repeat that if you need to, okay? Reasons are direct statements that provide evidence that support a claim. So I have a belief, I have a stand about this particular issue, and my reasonings are these direct statements or evidence that provides support for said claim, right? So we could ask, what does Nick claim? What claim does Nick make to his son about winning arguments? So winning arguments would be the issue. What is the claim that he makes about them? Okay, and what supports that? Okay, and then warrants are those unstated but necessary links between reasons and claims. So you have a claim. Let's see how we can apply that to this one. We have a claim. The claim is that Heather Holloway should be demoted from her position. That's my claim. I'm claiming it. Well, why are you claiming that, right? So, the warrant for her demotion would be, I claim that she should be demoted because she did the following thing. I can't tell you because it gives away the movie. But if I were to make a claim, which is for her to be demoted from her position, all right, I'm saying it's an unstated, right? The warrant would be the unstated thing, like I'm claiming this and these are the reasons, which is why her demotion would be warranted. Heather Holloway's demotion is warranted because of the thing that she did, right? Okay. Anyway, so the glue that attaches the reasons to the claims. The warrant's the thing in the middle, right? Here's my claim. She should be demoted. These are the reasons because she did such and such. So that's why her demotion was warranted. Does that make sense? Do I have to repeat that? All right, so the warrant would be that Heather Holloway should be demoted because I claim she should be demoted because she did the following thing, right? Her demotion was warranted. The first way I said it was better, so you can rewind it a little bit. Let me give you some better examples, and we're going to use some fairy tales for this. You can do this on your own, too, just for, like, shits and giggles, just for some funsies, to try and see how would you make a claim, a reason, and a warrant. I have the word qualifiers in the vocabulary, but I'll be honest with you. A qualifier is just, like, all, or a long time, or possibly. It's these really kind of, like, it's qualifying. It's not really, how do I say this? It's best in a defense. Like, I'll show you an example. You don't have to worry. I'm not really going to be using qualifier. I throw it in there because when you hear it as someone is using these qualifiers, you'll see it more when we do 12 Angry Men. Anyway, so claim. Here's my claim. All right, here's my claim. Goldilocks should be arrested and put in jail for breaking and entering, theft, and squatting. This is my claim. I'm claiming this. All right, she should be arrested. That's my claim. All right, and the reasons is because she broke into my house, she ate her porridge, she slept in our bed, and she was still there when we got home. Okay, so again, the breaking and entering, she broke into the house. The theft, she ate the porridge. She was squatting, she was sleeping in our bed. And the other reason is when we got there, she was still there. Literal evidence. You can't deny that. She was sitting right there, porridge all over her face. She's a messy eater. Okay. All right, now warrants, entering into someone's house without permission. So here's that warrant. Here's the glue in the middle. So our claim is she should be arrested for the following things. Our reasons is because she did the following things. Now the warrant, when you hear like someone bringing a warrant. So the warrant would be that entering someone's house without permission, stealing their food, and sleeping in their beds is unlawful and therefore should be punished. The warrant right there, that glue that's putting those together, would be entering into someone's house without permission, stealing their food, sleeping in their beds is unlawful and should be punished. So that warrant right there verifies the claim. So the claim is, this is what she did, or, this is what we think should happen. She should be arrested. And the warrant's like, yeah, if someone enters a house, they should, did all these things, they should be arrested. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. You can go to the notes, like, puts it down, read it a couple times and kind of think, what I'd love you to do on your own accord, we usually do this in class, but we're just going to have to do what we got to do. Try this with the Three Little Pigs, Jack and the Beanstalk, Cinderella, and Little Riding Hood. Brain. That's what happens when I talk for 40 minutes straight. I'm sorry, I'm trying to get this through as fast as I can. All right, so if you have a chance, go back and just give yourself an opportunity to try and figure out what would be the claim for the Three Little Pigs, right? The claim would be that the wolf should be arrested for property damage, or whatever the consequences are for property damage, because he huffed and puffed and blew all their damn houses down, right? So that's the reasoning. And the warrant is anyone who blows someone's house down should be arrested, or whatever, should the consequences for property damage, right? Go through, practice, have some funsies, enjoy it. And I think, let me make sure we got all that. we're done. Okay, ran a little long. We're doing what we got to do, but this is to help you so that when you go through and you're doing your reading responses, include the title of the article and who you're writing about or who wrote it. Make sure you use the vocabulary words correctly. And then lastly, what do I want from you? Make it so that it is your audience are your peers. If you get what I'm saying here, right? Like you can write very eloquently, but please make sure that it is something that, one, you're making your point and you're using the vocabulary correct, okay? And don't forget to respond to your peers. Y'all are doing great. Thank you. I'll see you on the other side.